It all started with a letter. Not a normal letter, like a birthday card from my aunt that always includes a $5 bill and smells faintly of mothballs. No, this was an official letter. You know the type. The envelope is just a little too thick, the paper just a little too crisp, and your name and address are printed in a font that's simultaneously sterile and smug. It's the kind of envelope that sits in your mailbox and radiates pure, unadulterated dread, because you know it's never, ever good news. It's never a letter saying, "Congratulations, your property value has increased because of your excellent taste in lawn gnomes." It's always a harbinger of doom, a declaration of war from the self-appointed guardians of suburban mediocrity, the Harmony Creek Homeowners Association. I stood in my kitchen, the offensive document in my hand, my Saturday morning tranquility shattered into a million pieces. Just moments before, I'd been in a state of suburban bliss. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and the scent of freshly cut grass, my neighbor Dave's, thankfully, not mine, was drifting through the open window. I was admiring my handiwork from the day before. A perfectly grilled burger. The char marks a testament to my mastery of the flame. Life was good. And then I made the fatal mistake of checking the mail. The letter's primary offense was its tone. It was written in a dialect I like to call passive-aggressive bureaucrat, a language designed to make simple demands sound like benevolent, unavoidable truths. "It has come to the attention of the Architectural Review Committee," it began, and I could already feel my blood pressure rising. I pictured the committee, a tribunal of one, HOA President Carol Peterson, sitting alone in her beige-on-beige living room, peering out her blinds with binoculars, a binder of bylaws open on her lap. That the boundary fence on the north-facing side of your property is exhibiting significant biological growth and discoloration. Biological growth. She made it sound like I was cultivating a primordial ooze back there, like at any moment a new life form might crawl out of my fence and terrorize the neighborhood. She meant the faint, greenish tint of algae that collected in the one corner that never gets any sun. Discoloration? That's called a patina. It's what happens when wood, you know, exists outside. Its character. The letter continued, citing the sacred texts. Per Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Harmony Creek Covenants, all external surfaces must be maintained in a clean and sanitary condition, free of mildew, grime, and other unsightly contaminants. Sanitary? Was she planning on eating off my fence? Did she think the local squirrels were at risk of contracting cholera? The phrase that really got me, the one that made a little vein in my temple start to throb, was unsightly contaminants. That wasn't just a fence she was talking about. That was my fence. A sturdy 6-foot cedar fence that I had built with my own 2 hands 3 summers ago. I'd sweated over every post hole, leveled every panel, and driven every screw. That fence was a monument to my fleeting moments of manliness. And this woman, this tyrant of throw pillows and decorative gourds, had the audacity to call its natural, distinguished aging process unsightly. The final paragraph was the kill shot. You have 14 days from the date of this letter to rectify the situation. A high-pressure power wash is the recommended course of action. Failure to comply will result in a non-compliance penalty of $50. $50 per day. 14 days. 14 days to erase 3 years of noble weathering. I crumpled the letter in my fist, the expensive paper crackling in protest. A $50 a day fine for having a fence that looked like it belonged outdoors. This wasn't a request. This was an ultimatum. This was a declaration of war. And if there's one thing I'm not good at, it's backing down from a fight. Especially a stupid one. I stormed out into the backyard, the crumpled letter still in my hand, and stared at the accused. It was a good fence, strong, handsome, in a rustic sort of way. The sun had bleached some boards to a silvery gray, while the shady spots, yes, had a bit of a greenish hue. It looked real. It looked like it had stories to tell. Carol's house, on the other hand, was the color of oatmeal and had all the personality of a tax form. My neighbor Dave's head popped up over the top of the fence like a friendly prairie dog. "Everything all right, man?" he asked, noticing the murderous look on my face. "You look like you just found out they're canceling pizza." I smoothed out the wrinkled letter and held it up for him to see. "Worse. I've been served." He squinted, reading it from a distance. A slow groan escaped his lips. "Oh man, the fence letter. I got one of those last year for my deck." "What did you do?" I asked. "I rented a power washer," he said with a shrug. "It's easier than fighting her, Mark. Trust me, she's unstoppable. They say a nuclear winter would be survived by only two things: cockroaches and Carol Peterson, holding a clipboard and checking for unapproved foliage." "No," I said, my voice low and determined. "Not this time. This is the hill I die on. It's not about the dirt, Dave. It's about the principle. She called my fence unsanitary." "She told me my welcome mat was a tripping hazard," Dave countered. "You can't reason with a person who sees a welcome mat as a mortal threat." He was right, of course. Reason was not a weapon to be used in this fight. Carol didn't deal in reason. She dealt in rules. Arbitrary, soul-crushing rules. I remembered the time she tried to fine me because my garbage can was still at the curb at 6:05 p.m. on trash day, a full 5 minutes past the HOA-mandated retrieval time. Or the incident last fall, when she sent a passive-aggressive email to the entire neighborhood about the seasonal appropriateness of lawn decorations after I put my Halloween skeletons out a week before October 1st. This time was different. This was personal. This was an attack on my craftsmanship, on the very concept of nature itself. Dave was wrong. I wasn't going to rent a power washer. I was going to fight back. I just had to figure out how. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the letter sitting on my nightstand like a little white grenade. My mind raced through a Rolodex of petty revenge fantasies. I could buy a dozen plastic flamingos and stage them in various unsavory positions in my front yard. I could take up the bagpipes, exclusively practicing at sunrise. I could use a power washer to carefully etch a giant, anatomically correct hand giving the middle finger into my driveway, arguing it would only be visible when it rained. But none of those felt right. They were temporary. They were childish. I needed something more elegant. Something more permanent. I needed a solution that followed the absolute letter of Carol's stupid law, but completely and utterly annihilated its spirit. I had to beat her at her own game. The bylaw said the fence had to be free of mildew, grime, and other unsightly contaminants. It didn't say how they had to be removed. What if they weren't removed at all? What if they were transformed? The word art floated into my consciousness. A beautiful, shining beacon in a sea of suburban rage. A plan, audacious and beautiful and utterly insane, began to form. And for the first time all day, I smiled. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated, malicious compliance. Before I could declare all-out artistic warfare, I knew I had to at least pretend to take the diplomatic route. It was a crucial step in the grand strategy. When the whole thing inevitably blew up, I needed to be able to say, with a straight face, I tried to reason with her. So, the next Monday, I put on a collared shirt to appear serious and respectable, and descended into the bureaucratic hellscape that was the HOA management office. The office was located in the community clubhouse, a building that looked like it had been designed by someone whose only architectural inspiration was a loaf of plain white bread. After navigating a phone tree that seemed to have been programmed by a sadistic robot, I managed to secure a 10-minute audience with Queen Carol herself. I walked into the small, airless office, and there she was, sitting behind a desk large enough to serve as an aircraft carrier. She was flanked by towering stacks of 3-ring binders, each one meticulously labeled with things like approved mailbox hues and lawn maintenance violations. 2020 present. She didn't look up when I came in. "Mark," she said, her voice as dry as toast, "you have 8 of your 10 minutes. "Hi, Carol," I began, forcing a pleasant tone. "Thanks for seeing me. I wanted to talk about the letter regarding my fence." "There's nothing to talk about," she said, finally gracing me with her gaze. Her eyes were small and hard, like 2 little ball bearings. "The covenant is perfectly clear. Your fence is a violation." I decided to try logic, deploying it like a delicate, hopeful little parachute into a hurricane. "I understand what the covenant says, but I think the term unsightly is subjective. The fence is made of cedar. It's supposed to weather. Power washing it can actually damage the wood fibers, forcing water in and leading to rot." I had Googled that last part, and I was quite proud of it. Carol offered a thin, reptilian smile. "The Architectural Review Committee, which I chair, has a very clear and objective definition of unsightly. And your biological growth fits it perfectly. Perhaps if you had used a board-approved stain and sealant in the first place, we wouldn't be having this conversation." I clenched my jaw. "A board-approved stain? What, is there an official HOA color palette for nature now?" "Your sarcasm is not appreciated, Mark," she said, her smile never wavering. It was a truly terrifying facial expression. "And it doesn't change the fact that your fence is bringing down the aesthetic harmony of the entire neighborhood. It's a slippery slope. First a grimy fence, then unkempt lawns. Before you know it, people are parking cars on their grass and painting their front doors unapproved shades of teal." The sheer, unadulterated horror in her voice as she said the word teal was something to behold. I felt a surge of desire to go home and immediately paint my front door the most obnoxious, retina-searing shade of teal I could find. "Carol, with all due respect, how does my slightly green fence affect anyone else? Are prospective homebuyers taking one look at my algae and running for the hills? Is it disrupting the local ecosystem?" "It's a matter of standards," she sniffed, straightening a perfectly aligned stack of papers. "Something you clearly don't appreciate." She reached into a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the vast expanse of her desk towards me. It was a list of HOA-approved power washing services. "You have 10 days left," she said, her voice dripping with finality. It was a dismissal. I stood there for a moment, the useless list in my hand, my logical parachute in flames. I had tried reason. I had tried to be an adult, but you can't reason with a zealot. As I walked out of that sterile office and back into the sunlight, I felt a strange sense of liberation. My conscience was clear. I had extended the olive branch, and she had slapped it away with a binder full of rules. The path was now clear. Diplomacy had failed. It was time for shock and awe. I got in my car and just started driving, fuming. I was ranting to myself, doing a high-pitched, mocking impression of Carol's voice. "It brings down the aesthetic harmony." Who talks like that? It was a fence. A beautiful, handcrafted, slightly in need of a bath fence. The injustice of it all was suffocating. I felt trapped in a sea of beige conformity, my only crime a desire to let wood be wood. Without paying attention to where I was going, I'd ended up on the other side of town, in an older, industrial neighborhood where the buildings were made of brick and history instead of vinyl siding and broken dreams. I stopped at a long red light, my head resting against the steering wheel in defeat. When I looked up, I saw it. On the side of a massive 4-story warehouse was a mural. It was a staggering piece of art, A giant, photorealistic portrait of an old man's face. His eyes were wise and tired, his skin a roadmap of wrinkles. But the genius of it, the thing that made my breath catch in my throat, was how the artist had used the wall itself. The old brick was cracked, stained with decades of rain and pollution, and crumbling in places. The artist hadn't covered it up, they had embraced it. The dark water stains became the shadows on the man's cheek. A long, vertical crack was incorporated into a deep wrinkle on his forehead. The faded, ghosted lettering of some long-gone business became the subtle texture of his tweed jacket. The artist had taken something old and decaying and grimy, and without hiding its flaws, had turned it into something breathtakingly beautiful. And that's when it hit me. It was a genuine, bona fide Archimedes-in-the-bathtub eureka moment. A lightning bolt of an idea so perfect, so elegant, so profoundly, beautifully petty that it made me want to weep with joy. The letter. Free of mildew, grime, and other unsightly contaminants. The HOA hadn't demanded I remove the grime. They demanded the fence be free of it. It was a loophole, a semantic wonderland. What if the grime wasn't a contaminant anymore? What if it ceased to be unsightly and instead became a medium, a pigment? What if my fence wasn't dirty? What if it was a canvas? A slow, maniacal grin spread across my face. I was going to follow Carol's order to the absolute letter. I was going to rectify the situation. But I wasn't going to rent a power washer. I was going to hire an artist. I was going to commission a masterpiece of malicious compliance, a glorious mural that didn't just cover up the grime, but celebrated it. The algae wouldn't be algae anymore. It would be the leaves of a magnificent tree. The water stains wouldn't be stains. They would be the shadows of a deep, mystical forest. The fence wouldn't be a violation. It would be an art installation. I started laughing. A loud, slightly unhinged laugh that probably made the driver in the car next to me lock his doors. I had found my weapon. And it wasn't a power washer. It was art. I raced home, my mind buzzing with a newfound purpose. My previous anger had been replaced by a giddy, creative energy. I sat down at my computer, fingers flying across the keyboard. My search history quickly became a bizarre cocktail of legal and artistic queries. HOA legal loopholes art installations. Can an HOA define what constitutes art? How to hire a graffiti artist for a legitimate project. Street artist commissions near me? The search was a journey into the subculture of the internet. I found forums filled with slang I didn't understand, and saw pictures of art on the sides of train cars that belonged in museums. I couldn't just post an ad on Craigslist saying, "Suburban dad seeks vandal for petty revenge scheme." I had to be cool. I had to be discreet. I finally found a local arts collective website with a forum for artists seeking commissions. I carefully crafted a post, trying to sound mysterious and intriguing. Title: Seeking Muralist for Unique Residential Project. Body: Artist wanted for a large-scale outdoor piece on a private residence. The project requires a unique approach and experience working with unconventional textures and surfaces. This is a work of artistic protest and a statement piece. Discretion is paramount. Compensation is significant. I hit post and leaned back, my heart pounding. Within a few hours, I had a handful of replies. Most were from art students wanting to build their portfolios. But one stood out. It was from a user named Sketch, and the entire message was 2 words: send details. There was no fluff, no portfolio link, just a terse, anonymous email address. I looked up the username online and found an Instagram account filled with jaw-dropping art. Complex, vibrant murals that transformed drab city walls into other worlds. This person was the real deal. They were a professional. I replied to the email, keeping it vague, and we began a cagey back and forth, a digital dance of two people trying to figure out if the other was a cop or a lunatic. Finally, after I assured him I was just a frustrated homeowner with an unorthodox artistic vision, he agreed to meet. The time and place were set. A dingy coffee shop in the city, halfway between his world and mine. The conspiracy was officially in motion. The coffee shop Sketch had chosen was the kind of place that prided itself on being uncomfortable. The chairs were made of recycled scrap metal. The music sounded like a robot having a panic attack, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and artistic pretension. I felt like I was wearing a sign that said, "Suburban Dad on a Field Trip." I ordered a black coffee to look serious and sat at a wobbly table in the corner, trying my best to blend in. A few minutes later, he walked in. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, with an intense, focused energy about him. He was wearing paint-splattered jeans, a faded hoodie, and a beanie pulled down low over his dark hair. He carried a worn leather sketchbook like a holy text. His eyes scanned the room, bypassing everyone else before landing on me. He had a built-in radar for people who didn't belong. He walked over and sat down without a word, his gaze skeptical. He looked me up and down, and I got the distinct impression he was checking me for a wire. "Your mark?" he asked. His voice was quiet, raspy. "That's me," I said, trying to sound casual. "Your Sketch?" "My name is Leo," he said flatly. "Sketch is what I do. So, what's this big secret statement piece?" He opened his sketchbook to a blank page, a pencil poised in his hand. "You want me to paint a giant mural of you flipping off your neighbor?" "Tempting," I admitted. "But I have something more subtle in mind. The canvas is a fence, a 60-foot-long, 6-foot-high cedar fence in a quiet, soul-crushingly uniform suburban neighborhood." Leo scoffed, a flash of disappointment in his eyes. "A fence? Seriously? Your ad made it sound like I was going to be painting the side of a government building. I paint fences for dentists' kids, man. What's so special about yours?" I leaned forward, lowering my voice conspiratorially. "The special part isn't the fence. It's the paint, or, more accurately, the lack thereof. The fence is dirty." He just stared at me. The pencil in his hand stopped moving. "Okay, so you want me to clean it before I paint?" "No!" I said, maybe a little too loudly. A few hipsters glanced over at our table. I lowered my voice again. "That's the genius of it. I don't want you to clean it. I don't want you to paint over the dirt. I want you to paint with the dirt. The grime, the mildew, the water stains. That's our palette. The art has to incorporate the grime." Leo's expression was a perfect mask of bewildered disbelief. He looked at me like I had just tried to explain the rules of a game I'd made up in a dream. "Hold on. Let me get this straight. You want to hire me? To not clean your fence, but to arrange the dirt? Artistically?" "Precisely," I said, beaming. He leaned back in his unforgiving metal chair and just studied me for a long moment. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was trying to decide if I was a genuine eccentric or a complete madman. "Why?" he finally asked. "This sounds like the world's most complicated prank." That was my cue. I pulled the neatly folded HOA letter from my jacket pocket and slid it across the table. "This is why," I said. He picked it up and read it, his expression shifting as he scanned the condescending prose. He read the line about biological growth and snorted. He got to the part about unsightly contaminants, and a slow, wicked grin spread across his face. It was the first time I'd seen him smile. It transformed his whole demeanor from suspicious artist to fellow revolutionary. He looked up at me, his eyes alight with a newfound respect. "This is beautiful," he whispered, tapping the letter with his finger. "This isn't a commission. This is a counteroffensive." "I'm calling it Operation Malicious Compliance," I said. "I love it," he said, the pencil finally starting to move, sketching furiously in his notebook. "The ultimate artistic challenge, using the very thing they hate as the medium itself. It's a middle finger, but it's a middle finger rendered in algae and form." He looked up, his eyes shining with creative fire. "So this HOA president, this Carol, she's the villain?" "She's the final boss," I confirmed. He slammed his sketchbook shut. The sound echoed through the quiet coffee shop. "I'm in," he said. "This is the best idea I've heard all year, but my found grime conceptual work, it's not cheap." We haggled on a price. It was more than I expected, but as he explained the specialized materials he'd need, transparent sealants to preserve the grime, subtle pigments to enhance the natural colors, delicate tools for selective cleaning, I realized this was a serious artistic endeavor. I was no longer just hiring a guy to paint my fence, I was commissioning a masterpiece. I transferred the deposit from my savings account, feeling a thrill of righteous, expensive rebellion. A few nights later, under the cloak of a moonless sky, Leo came to my house for a site visit. It felt absurdly like a scene from a spy movie. I met him at the end of the street and led him through the shadows to my backyard, both of us whispering as if the neighborhood's garden gnomes were secret agents for the HOA. "Okay," he said, pulling out a high-powered flashlight. "Let's see the canvas." He approached the fence not like a vandal, but like a surgeon or a master craftsman. He ran his hand over the weathered boards, feeling the texture. He shined his light on the patches of green algae, examining them from different angles. He took close-up photos with his phone, muttering things to himself like, "Excellent biofilm diversity here. Good tonal range in the northern quadrant." "This is even better than I imagined," he said, a genuine excitement in his voice. "Look at this." He pointed his flashlight at a dark, vertical streak running down from the top of a panel. "Water stain. Most people see an imperfection. I see the perfect shadow for the trunk of a giant redwood." He moved down the fence. "And this patch of pale green mildew? See how it's kind of misty and ethereal? That's our forest canopy. We can make it look like sunlight is filtering through it. This isn't a dirty fence, man. This is a landscape painting waiting to happen." We spent the next hour in my dark backyard, plotting. We were two co-conspirators, united by a common enemy and a ridiculous, brilliant plan. We decided on the theme, a majestic, ancient forest scene, something serene and beautiful and completely undeniable as art. It would be so gorgeous that even Carol would have to admit, through gritted teeth, that it wasn't just a contaminant. We wanted to create something that would make calling it grime sound insane. The final piece of the plan was the timing. My 14-day deadline expired on a Sunday. We would execute the entire project in one marathon, all-night session on the Friday before. It would give the neighborhood exactly 1 day to discover it, gossip about it, and lose their collective minds before Carol could officially bring the hammer down on Monday morning. As Leo packed up his gear to leave, a sense of nervous energy buzzed between us. This was really happening. "You know," I said, "I think this is the most exciting thing I've done since I refinanced my mortgage." Leo smirked. "Don't worry, man," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "By the time we're done, your fence is going to be a legend." In the days leading up to what we were now calling the Night of Creation, I was a bundle of nerves and excitement. I bought supplies for our mission: 2 high-powered work lights, a long extension cord, and enough coffee, donuts, and pizza to fuel a small army. Every time I saw Carol making her rounds in her golf cart, peering at people's lawns with a judgmental eye, I just smiled to myself. she had no idea what was coming. The quiet, beige-colored world of Harmony Creek was about to get a serious splash of color. And a whole lot of grime. Friday night arrived cloaked in a perfect suburban darkness. The air was cool and still, and the only sounds were the distant hum of the highway and the rhythmic chirping of crickets. It was the kind of peaceful night that Carol and the HOA probably cherished. Little did they know, their carefully curated tranquility was about to be artistically vandalized. I started setting up just after my wife and kids went to bed. I felt like a teenager sneaking out of the house, my heart thumping with a mixture of adrenaline and guilt. I ran the extension cord from the garage, positioning the work lights so they'd create a bright, contained stage in my backyard, illuminating the 60-foot canvas of my fence while trying to minimize the light spill into my neighbors' yards. Every clink of the metal light stand sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Just before 11 p.m., a beat-up, unmarked white van pulled up silently to the curb in front of my house. A side door slid open, and Leo hopped out, dressed head to toe in black work clothes, a bag of tools slung over his shoulder. He moved with a quiet efficiency that told me he was used to working in the dark. "All clear, boss?" he whispered, giving me a nod as he slipped through the side gate. "The eagle is in the nest," I whispered back, immediately cringing at how dorky I sounded. Leo just grinned. "Right, let's get this art party started." He unpacked his gear with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. It wasn't just spray cans like I'd imagined. He had an arsenal of strange and wonderful tools. Tiny paintbrushes, sponges of varying textures, spray bottles filled with clear liquids, soft cloths, and even a few dental-looking scraping tools. This wasn't going to be a quick splash-and-dash job. This was going to be surgery. I flicked on the work lights, and the fence was suddenly bathed in a stark, artificial glare. The weathering, the algae, the water stains, every unsightly contaminant was thrown into high relief. "Perfection," Leo breathed, looking at the fence with an artist's reverence. Now, the first rule of grime-based art: we enhance, we do not erase. And then he began. Watching him work was mesmerizing. He wasn't painting a picture onto the fence, he was coaxing a picture out of it. He started by using a spray bottle filled with water and a soft brush, not to clean the fence, but to draw with subtraction. He selectively wiped away parts of the green algae, the negative space creating the outline of a massive, ancient tree trunk. The parts he left untouched suddenly looked darker, more intentional. It was like magic. He worked his way down the fence, his movements a fluid, focused dance. He used a clear, matte sealant to lock in some of the darker patches of grime, giving them a rich, deep texture that would become the forest floor. He took a bottle of a slightly tinted transparent glaze and misted it over the pale green mildew at the top of the fence, transforming the splotchy mess into a luminous, leafy canopy. My role in this grand artistic heist was to be the lookout and the caterer. I kept a steady supply of coffee and donuts coming, and I paced the perimeter of my yard, peering through the darkness for any signs of trouble. Every distant car door slam, every dog bark, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. We were in deep violation of at least 3 HOA noise and light ordinances, not to mention the unwritten rule of don't do weird, suspicious things in your backyard after midnight. Around 2 a.m., we had our first close call. I saw a light flick on in the house of Mrs. Higgins, my elderly neighbor to the left. A moment later, her back door creaked open, and she emerged with her tiny, perpetually yapping terrier, Muffin. "Lights!" I hissed. Leo instantly killed his headlamp, and I switched off the main work lights, plunging the yard into blackness. We both ducked down behind a large hydrangea bush, my heart pounding against my ribs. We could hear Mrs. Higgins shuffling across her lawn, muttering to her dog. Honestly, Muffin, the things people get up to, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. Floodlights at this hour. It's just not civilized. Muffin let out a few high-pitched yaps in our general direction. I held my breath, positive he could smell the pizza we'd been eating. After what felt like an eternity, Mrs. Higgins guided her dog back inside, and the light in her house went out. We waited another full minute before slowly getting up, adrenaline coursing through our veins. That was too close, Leo whispered, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. Tell me about it, I said. Muffin is the HOA's top field agent. We got back to work, the shared danger creating a strange bond between us. We were partners in crime now. As the hours ticked by, the mural began to truly take shape. It was no longer just a collection of enhanced stains. It was a world. A deer, its body formed from a section of beautifully silvered wood, peeked out from behind the algae moss tree trunk. A sly fox, its reddish-brown coat hinted at with the barest whisper of pigment on a patch of weathered cedar, curled up amongst roots made of dark water stains. Just after 4 a.m., as Leo was adding the final delicate details, the glint of an eye, the texture of fur, we had our second scare. The slow, sweeping headlights of a car turning onto our street washed over the front of my house. I peeked through the gate and my stomach dropped. A police cruiser? It was rolling down the street at a crawl, its spotlight flicking on and off, scanning the quiet houses. It was just a routine patrol, but to us, it felt like the entire SWAT team was descending. We froze, motionless silhouettes in the dark. The spotlight beam swept across my neighbor's yard, then mine, briefly illuminating the half-finished mural in a flash of white light before moving on. The car continued down the street and disappeared around the corner. We both let out a breath we didn't realize we'd been holding. The eastern sky was just beginning to fade from black to a deep indigo. We were running out of time. Final touches, Leo said, his voice tight with concentration. He worked with a frantic energy, his hands a blur as he spritzed, wiped, and sealed the last section of the fence. As the first pale rays of dawn broke over the rooftops, he finally stepped back. He put his hands on his hips, breathing heavily, his face smudged with dirt and sealant. It's done, he said. I stepped back and stood beside him, looking at what we had created. The 60 feet of my fence, my symbol of suburban oppression, was gone. In its place was a breathtaking, mystical forest scene that seemed to glow in the soft morning light. It was subtle, beautiful, and so cleverly integrated with the fence's natural state that you couldn't tell where the grime ended and the art began. It was a masterpiece. It was a weapon. It was, without a doubt, the most beautiful act of defiance I had ever witnessed. We looked at each other, two exhausted, triumphant co-conspirators, and we broke into wide, silent grins. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was wait for the Queen to walk into it. I got about 90 minutes of sleep before my own internal alarm clock, finely tuned to the rhythms of impending chaos, jolted me awake. I crept downstairs, made a pot of coffee so strong it could probably dissolve steel, and took up my post on the front porch. I sat there in my bathrobe, sipping my coffee and pretending to read the news on my phone, but really my focus was entirely on the street. I was a general surveying the battlefield before the first shots were fired. The morning was deceptively peaceful. The sun was out, the paperboy had made his rounds, and the world was, for the moment, blissfully unaware of the artistic bombshell that had been detonated in my backyard. The first sign of discovery came around 8:30 a.m. A man I recognized from a few blocks over jogged past my house, his head down, lost in the rhythm of his playlist. As he passed the side of my yard, something must have caught his eye. He slowed to a walk, pulled out his earbuds, and stopped dead in his tracks. He stared at the fence for a solid 30 seconds, a look of profound confusion on his face. Then, he broke into a slow grin, pulled out his phone and snapped a picture before continuing on his jog, shaking his head with a laugh. Phase 1 was a success. The first civilian casualty was one of amusement. Next came my neighbor, Dave. He opened his front door to grab his newspaper, still in his pajamas. He saw the jogger taking a picture and looked over to see what the commotion was. His jaw literally dropped. His eyes went wide, then darted over to me on my porch. I gave him a slow, deliberate wink over the rim of my coffee mug. He just shook his head, a look of pure, unadulterated awe on his face, and retreated back into his house, presumably to process the sheer audacity of what he'd just witnessed. Over the next hour, the situation escalated. A small but steady stream of dog walkers, morning strollers, and curious neighbors began to form a small, murmuring crowd on the sidewalk by my fence. The reactions were a perfect cross-section of the neighborhood. The younger couples were taking pictures and laughing. The older, more traditionalist residents were pointing and whispering with concerned looks on their faces. It was becoming a local event. My fence was the talk of the town. And then at precisely 9:47 a.m., she arrived. Carol's silver sedan turned the corner onto our street, moving at its customary patrol speed of 5 miles per hour. I saw her notice the small crowd gathered on the sidewalk, and her lips tightened into a familiar, disapproving frown. She probably assumed someone had left their garbage cans out again. She pulled her car over, not to the curb, but right in the middle of the damn street, as if to announce that her authority superseded petty traffic laws, and stepped out, clipboard in hand. She marched towards the crowd with the determined stride of a dictator about to quell a minor uprising. "All right, what's all this then?" she began, her voice sharp. And then she saw it. Her eyes followed the gaze of the crowd and landed on my fence. For a fleeting moment, her face was a blank slate of non-comprehension. Her brain, so accustomed to processing the world in terms of violations and bylaws, simply could not compute the information it was receiving. And then, it clicked. The dawning realization was a magnificent, theatrical event. Her eyes widened. Her mouth fell open. Her face cycled through a spectacular spectrum of colors, from pale shock to flushed anger, finally settling on a shade of furious crimson that perfectly matched the stop sign on the corner. She turned, her entire body rigid with rage, and locked eyes with me. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee and gave her a polite little wave. This broke the spell. She let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a shriek. "Mark!" she screeched, stalking across my lawn, completely ignoring the "please keep off the grasses" sign she herself had forced me to install. "What is this? What have you done?" I stood up and walked calmly to the edge of my porch. "Good morning to you too, Carol," I said, my voice dripping with faux cheerfulness. "I'm glad you noticed. I took the board's feedback to heart and rectified the situation with the fence. Do you like it? It's a custom art installation." "Art?" she sputtered, gesturing wildly at the mural. "This is not art. This is filth. It's graffiti. You have defaced your property in the most obscene way imaginable." "I disagree," I said, taking another calm sip. "First, it's not graffiti if you own the property and commissioned the work. That's a key legal distinction. And second, I don't find a serene forest scene particularly obscene. I mean, there's a deer, Carol. A deer. It's practically a Disney movie back there." A few of the younger neighbors on the sidewalk snickered. This only fueled her rage. "This is a flagrant violation of Section 12, she yelled, her voice trembling. "The fence is still covered in grime." "Ah, but is it unsightly?" I countered, raising an eyebrow. "That's the question, isn't it? I'd argue that it is now, in fact, quite sightly. The grime is no longer a contaminant. It has been recontextualized as an artistic medium. I think it's rather beautiful. You are going to be fined into the next century, she shrieked, fumbling for her phone. I am calling the police right now. We'll see what they think of your art installation. Please do, I said with a smile. I'd love to get an officer's professional opinion. Her fingers stabbed at her phone's screen as she reported a major act of vandalism, her voice filled with a dramatic urgency that suggested my fence had gained sentience and was now terrorizing the neighborhood. The crowd of onlookers had now doubled in size. This was better than cable television. 5 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up to the scene, its lights off. 2 officers got out, a tall, older one with a tired, seen-it-all expression, and a younger, shorter one, who looked like he was trying very hard to maintain a professional demeanor. The older one's name tag read Miller, the younger one's Sanchez. Miller surveyed the scene, the crowd, the car in the middle of the road, the enraged woman, and me, the guy in the bathrobe holding a coffee mug. "All right, what's the problem here?" he asked, his voice heavy with the weariness of 1,000 petty disputes. "Officer, thank heavens!" Carol cried, rushing over to them. "Arrest this man! He has vandalized his property with this monstrosity!" Both officers turned to look at the fence. They stood there for a moment in silence. Sanchez's mouth twitched, and he quickly turned his head to cough, though it sounded suspiciously like a suppressed laugh. Miller turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Sir, did you paint this on your fence?" "No, officer," I said politely. "I commissioned it, hired a professional artist. It's my house, my fence." He then turned back to Carol. "Ma'am, it's his property. It's not a crime to paint your own fence." "But it's an HOA violation," she insisted, her voice getting shrill. "It's covered in filth. He was supposed to clean it." Miller and Sanchez exchanged a quick, almost imperceptible glance. It was a look that communicated entire volumes of shared experience with precisely this kind of situation. "Ma'am," Miller said with the patience of a saint, "the Alexandria Police Department does not enforce HOA bylaws. That's a civil matter. As long as the painting isn't obscene or a public nuisance, there's nothing we can do." He looked back at the mural, studying the gentle deer and the mossy trees. "And I'm not seeing anything obscene here. It's actually pretty nice. You have a good eye, kid," he added, nodding at Sanchez. Sanchez finally broke, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Yeah, it's really detailed. I like the fox." Carol looked like she was going to have an aneurysm. She had called in the cavalry, and they were complimenting the enemy's tactics. She was defeated, humiliated, and rendered utterly powerless by the calm, impartial logic of the law. "So, we're done here?" Miller asked, already turning to go. "Good, ma'am, you need to move your car. It's blocking traffic." He and Sanchez got back in their cruiser. As they pulled away, I could see both of them laughing. Carol stood frozen in the middle of my lawn, her face a mask of pure, impotent fury. The crowd began to disperse, many of them chuckling and shaking their heads. The battle was over, and I, in my bathrobe, had won. The immediate aftermath of the police encounter was a glorious, resounding silence from the HOA. But I knew Carol. She wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. She was the type to retreat, regroup, and pore over her sacred binders of bylaws until she found some obscure clause to smite me with. Sure enough, 2 days later, an email blast went out. Emergency HOA board meeting. Agenda: property maintenance and aesthetic compliance. I was the unspoken guest of honor. I decided to attend. I put on a blazer over a polo shirt, my official uniform for suburban dad who is about to politely wreck your entire world. I also came prepared, I had called Leo and asked him to write up an artist's statement for the mural. He had delivered a document so full of pretentious, impenetrable art speak that it was a masterpiece in its own right. I had it printed on high-quality cardstock. The meeting was held in the same soulless clubhouse room as my previous encounter with Carol. The other 4 board members, 2 mild-mannered retirees, and a couple who looked perpetually terrified of Carol, were already seated. Carol sat at the head of the table, her face set like granite. She opened the meeting by launching into a tirade about the blatant and disrespectful violation on my property, painting a picture of a neighborhood on the brink of aesthetic collapse, all because of my fence. When she was finished, all eyes turned to me. I stood up calmly. "Thank you, Carol, for that dramatic reading," I began. "I'm here to assure the board that I have, in fact, complied with the notice I was given. The bylaw states that the fence must be maintained and free of unsightly contaminants. I have not only maintained it, I have curated it." I then proceeded to read Leo's artist's statement aloud, my voice filled with grave seriousness. "The Harmony Creek mural is a postmodern exploration of the dialectic between nature and suburban conformity. It recontextualizes what society deems grime as an organic medium, challenging our preconceived notions of decay versus beauty. By integrating the natural patina of the cedar with subtle anthropogenic pigments, the piece creates a liminal space, a commentary on the Sisyphean struggle to impose sterile order on a chaotic living world." I continued on like this for 2 full minutes. By the time I was finished, the board members were staring at me with a mixture of confusion and awe. They had no idea what I had just said, but it sounded important. "In short," I concluded, folding the paper, "the fence is no longer dirty. It is a significant cultural asset to our community. Are you really going to fine me for increasing the aesthetic value of the neighborhood and providing a public art piece, free of charge, to the residents?" The 2 retirees looked at each other, then at Carol. They were clearly wavering. They had seen the mural. They'd heard from neighbors who actually loved it. More importantly, they were afraid of getting sued by a guy who used words like dialectic and liminal space. Carol tried to argue, but the wind had been taken out of her sails. The board, in a stunning act of mutiny, voted to table the issue for further review, which is HOA speak for "We are never, ever touching this again." It was a quiet, bureaucratic victory, but a victory nonetheless. Carol, however, had one last card to play. A few days later, a large truck from a company called Ultimate Power Washers rumbled down our street and parked in front of my house. A burly contractor with arms the size of tree trunks got out and started unreeling a thick hose. This was Carol's final, desperate move. Hire someone to clean the fence forcibly and stick me with the bill. I walked out to meet him at the curb, my heart pounding a little. This was the real front line. "Can I help you?" I asked. "Yeah, here to wash this fence," the guy grunted, not looking at me. "Got an emergency order from your HOA president. Said something about a biohazard?" "I'm the homeowner," I said, planting my feet. "And I didn't order that service. You are not authorized to perform work on my property." The contractor finally stopped and looked at me, then past me at the mural. He squinted. He tilted his head. He walked past me onto the sidewalk and just stared at the fence for a solid minute, his tough guy demeanor slowly melting away. "Whoa," he said, his voice now soft with surprise. "Did you paint that?" "I had it commissioned," I said. He let out a low whistle. "Man, my daughter loves to draw. She'd go nuts for this. That deer looks real." He looked from the mural back to his high-pressure washer, then back to the mural. He shook his head. "Nope, can't do it," he said, starting to reel his hose back in. "I get paid to wash off dirt, not that. That's art. Sorry, pal. Tell your HOA lady to find someone with no soul. He got back in his truck and drove away. That was the final nail in the coffin. The story of the contractor's refusal became a local legend. The article in the community blog went viral on Facebook. People started driving over from other neighborhoods just to take pictures. My fence became a beloved local oddity, a quirky landmark. It was a symbol of defiance against the tyranny of beige. A few weeks later, I was in my backyard, grilling burgers, just like on that fateful Saturday when the letter first arrived. Dave was over, leaning against the fence, a beer in his hand. The mural was behind him, a beautiful, permanent fixture of my yard. "You know," Dave said, taking a sip of his beer, "I heard Carol is facing a recall petition. Apparently your fence was the last straw for a lot of people. You're a hero, man. A suburban legend." I laughed, flipping a burger. "I'm not a hero, Dave. I'm just a guy who really, really didn't want to rent a power washer." I leaned back in my chair, the sun warming my face. I looked at my fence, my beautiful, defiant, artistic, and, yes, technically still grimy fence. The war was over. The fines never came. The peace had been restored, but on my own terms. I had fought the law of the HOA, and for once, the little guy had won, and I had the coolest fence in the entire state to prove it.